everybody. This is Ben and Scott here on Reading D&D Aloud. And this is the week that Cynthia Williams was fired from or quit from Wizards of the Coast. And Scott just was saying, "Hey, should we talk about that?" And I said, I don't know what I have to say other than, and then began to talk. And I was like, well, I guess if we're gonna do this, we should do this.
I think if
Uh,
there's one golden rule about this podcast is even when we don't think we have things to say, as soon as we start talking about tabletop role-playing games, we always have something to say.
so I'll say a thing that I haven't said in public before because I'm now disavowing the thing that I thought, which is I have suspected that in fact there were negotiations going on to sell D&D and or Wizards to a Chinese corporation. The departure of Cynthia Williams almost certainly means that that theory was wrong, and it's a good thing I didn't go around shouting about it on the internet because if you're Cynthia Williams and you're the CEO of Wizards of the Coast and there's going to be some kind of a sale, there's a decent chance you're going to get a bonus out of it if there's a sale that goes through. So why would you depart when you're looking at a multi-million dollar bonus probably if you just stick around a little while longer? So it certainly disproves that pet theory of mine. I will also add she was one of the Amazon people at Wizards of the Coast, which I kind of talked about before. There will be something that can be learned from her successor. If they choose someone from outside the organization who might be another Amazon person, like if whoever replaces her has Amazon on their resume, that for me is a warning bell. If they bring someone up from inside who is one of her Amazon people, that for me is a warning bell. Uh, the thing I don't know what's going on with Magic the Gathering.
But
Um,
yeah,
good. You want to burst in here?
well, I want to quickly comment on that. I mean, I think the ideal scenario, and again, I want to stay away from speculation because I have no idea what's happening. And certainly, I mean, the Wizards Coast Hasbro conglomeration things is, and business in general. If you guys want to see my household finances, you'll have an idea that I should be the last person talking about business. But the ideal scenario is that at some point, maybe during the OGL fiasco, somebody at Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro, somebody higher up, recognized that there is this disjuncture, if that's a word, between the digital world and what Dungeons and Dragons represents. The entire OGL fiasco showed that they couldn't really make a lot of the decisions, or there's an entirely different set of expectations for gamers in the tabletop role-playing game space than there are for computer gamers, right? And obviously Cynthia Williams' background and obviously her expertise, which is rather considerable, may not have perfectly aligned to the tabletop role-playing game community. I'm saying this is an ideal world. I'm not saying this is what happened, but it's interesting. The reason I wanted to kind of dovetail on what you were saying is that this concept that if we see another person come in that has a background in digital systems and digital consumer problems, or excuse me, digital consumer businesses, then that is going to be a sign that they didn't learn anything from the OGL fiasco. Ideally, we'll see somebody that coming in that's got a little bit of experience dealing with not only just the community, but the lexicon, the language, the background, what the expectations are for tabletop role-playing game designers. We keep going. It's so interesting to me because here we are in this kind of this renaissance of tabletop role-playing games. Somebody might call it a golden age, and we're and yet Wizards of the Coast seems to be really flailing as to trying to figure out what to do with all. It's like it seems to be the success, whether it's Baldur's Gate 3 or it's the middling success. Middling success isn't the right word to use for the Dungeons and Dragons movie, but I don't exactly know what it is. I know it was a bit of a disappointment at the box office, but at the same time, it was an absolute success for the people within the community and the concept of building the brand higher. I do think it's actually succeeding in that department. My point was, at some point, somebody's got to figure. Wizards of the Coast just seems to get in their way as to not taking these. They're hitting home runs and home runs, and then I have no metaphor on how you mess up a home run. I don't know. Somebody's throwing it back on the field is what Wizards of the Coast seems to do, and I'm hoping that in the perfect world, Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast has realized they've got to find somebody who can capitalize on these successes instead of do things like the OGL fiasco and completely ruin. I mean, which happened almost at the same time as the Dungeons and Dragons movie, right? It's like every time they take a step forward, they seem to take like 42 steps back.
So a thing that I always reflect on is the fact that we are obsessed with the Dungeons and Dragons side of Wizards of the Coast, and yet within the company, it is
Right. Yeah.
brings in a fraction of the money
Hmm.
of Magic the Gathering, especially over the life of the company. Dungeons and Dragons is having obviously the last year may have been bad. I will say another thing I believe is indicated by the departure of Cynthia Williams. If she left, it's possible we're going to hear more bad sales data from across the board, and she didn't want to be the one sitting there holding the bag when it comes out.
Yeah.
I'm speculating way more than usual here, so I want to underline that all of this is speculation on my part. Uh, I and whatever is going on with Magic the Gathering will be more important to the company than what is going on with Dungeons and Dragons, which is a persistent frustration for those of us obsessed with D&D, but it is the way it is. I
But you're talking in terms of like of basic profit and sales. I mean, and I know that,
yeah,
Magic is such a big deal. And again, this is, I this is a little this is not within my, my wheelhouse at all thinking about this business. I just wonder if I mean, I agree with you that certainly Magic brings in a lot. I agree with you. It's a fact that obviously that Magic brings in a lot more money, but isn't I'm wondering if not the, and I don't know how to use, I don't want to say the word brands necessarily, but there's something around the image of Dungeons and Dragons or the cultural ubiquity of all of its icons and archetypes that I think here's a question, right? Like I don't play Magic. I played it a little bit when it came out. I always try to get into it, but now it's like I feel like I've lost that opportunity. It's like every time I sit down with it, everyone knows the rules, the mechanics so well. And this is, of course, a conversation to have about, the trying to get into Magic at this date. My point was, I couldn't name, the only reason I think Ravnica is the world, and the only reason that I know the world of Magic is because it came out in a campaigning saying for Dungeons and Dragons. Are there iconic? I mean, I know that there are iconic archetypal cards for Magic, I think, ones that were like really powerful. Not that I would know what they are. Again, not a Magic guy. But Dungeons and Dragons, the cachet. I mean, geez, Vecna. If anybody's seen Stranger Things, they've probably seen it, and that's actually kind of a fairly obscure character. But from a lot of the concept, I mean, there's no one on my block who probably can't name at least a couple characters from Dungeons and Dragons. Like there's a strange my point that is all over the place is that Dungeons and Dragons seems to be more embedded in the cultural imagination than Magic. And this comes back to the concept of how do you monetize that, right? And that because nobody's ever really able to commercially capture perfectly the fact that everybody understands these things comes back to the concept that tabletop role-playing games often exist in our imagination. All you need is one book to be able to go and people continue. I mean, that was the whole, Cynthia Williams's most famous and unfortunate quotation, because I think in some ways it's going to define her tenure, at least on our side, was that concept of like, this is an under-monetized brand. And despite the fact that she got a lot of grief from that, those of us who kind of study this a little bit know that that's the story of Dungeons and Dragons since 1979 in many ways has been trying to find some way out of getting people to buy just more than one book every 8 years. My point, again, sorry, I'm all over the place, but my point is, isn't Dungeons and Dragons still important to Hasbro because of what it represents from an ethos, that they are the holders of this unbelievable artifact of imagination, even if they haven't figured out how to take that artifact and sell it at the local, you know, what at the
bodega.
local
It's being
blacksmith.
sold at
Yeah,
a bodega.
trying to think of what you'd sell it at the local, Hamlet, village of Hamlet, where you sell this giant artifact. I guess you got to sell it to some sage. But what do you think about that? Do you think that D&D may be important to Hasbro from that ethos concept of like what it represents, the fact that they're holders of this thing rather than necessarily money, and that's maybe why they could be hesitant to sell it?
So, Magic the Gathering, it has I believe I'm paraphrasing Ryan Dancy here. I forget where I heard him say this. Magic the Gathering is a game with a relatively small hard core of players
Hmm.
who are willing to plow large sums of money into their hobby. Dungeons and
Sure.
Dragons is a much bigger player pool that Wizards of the Coast always has a hard time getting money from.
Right. Yeah.
I
Hmm.
forget which one of our listeners at the live show in at GaryCon said that a role-playing game is a durable good, which is an economic term that I've thought about a lot since then, but haven't looked up yet. But I think to myself, oh yeah, durable good. That's the economic term for what D&D is that I need to research because it'll probably be illuminating because again, I think about this a lot and I have not Googled durable good to see like the features of a durable good, what can we expect from it and um I would hope somebody at Wizards of the Coast at some point was like, okay, so if D&D is a durable good, how are we going to make money off of this? Uh, I a thing that you have said that is also that I think it was also at the GaryCon live show. You said that a role-playing game and D&D, those are actually practices as much as they are a product.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can have huge problems with the product, but the practice can be going along fine. In my the golden age of RPGs is dead post, if I was going to revise that, I would probably say that I should have distinguished more between the product and the practice of role-playing games. I feel like I had something else I was going to say about Cynthia Williams, but I may have lost the thread.
Well, I was going to read you I was going to
Oh,
read
read it.
from,
Read
here's
to me.
Wikipedia.
Yeah,
Here's
do it.
Wikipedia to the great editors of Wikipedia. Thank you. In economics, a durable good or a hard good or a consumer durable is a good that does not quickly wear out, or more specifically, one that yields utility over time, rather than being completely consumed in one use. Items like bricks could be considered perfectly durable goods because they should theoretically never wear out. Oh, tell that to time and erosion. Highly durable goods such as refrigerators or cars usually continue to be useful for several years of use. So durable goods are typically characterized by long periods between successive purchases, which makes me think about how the place that I bought my car is constantly contacting me, asking me to sell it because people they're always looking for used cars because they really want me to lease again. I'm just thinking about how cars are a durable good in that way. Anyway, that is the concept of durable goods, and we've talked about that a lot. It's interesting me because they want to make I find that fascinating that there's this like hardcore committed magic folks that really and my guess is are those folks must be really kind of hardcore collectors. Man, there's just something about cards that gets people crazy. I'm thinking about this yesterday. Is almost every weekend, all of the neighborhood kids where I live all get together and trade their Pokemon cards, despite the fact that I can barely get a few of them to actually play the game. Anyway, but it's interesting to me the Cynthia Williams leaving, and again, we can only do speculation because neither of us know whether she was fired or she quit, but we do know that it does give us it gives us some insight into whether it's actually going to be sold or not. Because as you mentioned, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to leave right before a major acquisition. At the same time, it seemed like Wizards of the Coast was trying to go to some type of digital, was really going to go in the D&D Beyond and now the virtual tabletop that they've been currently making, which, by the way, has been getting fairly good reviews. So again, it leaves it up in the air. It's like whoever is going to be the next CEO of Wizards of the Coast, whoever is going to be in charge of the direction of Dungeons and Dragons, it's really going to be interesting to see who that person is, whether they're going to come from the tabletop RPG field or it's going to be another person who they're looking for has some type of digital experience or they're going to be trying to walk the razor's edge of those two, media environments, which are in many ways rather different.
My gut is telling me that she quit. I have
Mm-hmm.
no evidence for that other than the speed of her departure. She essentially gave 2 weeks' notice.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I think if she had been fired, they would have had somebody lined up right away. It did seem like it was like, wow, where did this come from? And they're like, the PR spin on it seemed like it was made rather quickly. Like it hadn't been lined up. Usually, if you're letting somebody go, you've spent a couple weeks making some really good messages that you're going to send both to staff and public. And in this case, it really did seem rather abrupt.
I guess we should also take a moment to point out Rascal News broke this story, I believe, on Twitter. So if you're not a subscriber of Rascal News, hey, consider going and subscribing to Rascal News. It's Lynn Codega's outlet since they were let go from I forget where in the autumn. All right. So is there anything else I have to say about the departure of Cynthia Williams? Only that as Wizards of the Coast becomes a revolving door, it is much easier to write about it. The chances of me getting an interview with Cynthia Williams just dramatically shot up. They weren't good to begin with. I don't know that they're good now, but they're way better than they were before. So getting the CEO of Wizards to talk about the OGL controversy, that's an awesome thing that hopefully can happen. And so yeah. So Scott, do you want to say anything else about this, or should we move on to something?
No, I think I think it's one of those moments where the reason that we almost struggle to say anything about it is because we really don't know what's going to happen next, and I think it's really interesting. I know that both of you and I are really intrigued by kind of what goes on about one of our favorite games, so kind of stay tuned on that. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
And hopefully people found this discussion to be thoughtful and illuminating, because one of the things I certainly find to be frustrating is uh, the internet will make its own narrative
Yeah, yeah.
in and again there's obviously a huge absence of fact around this story. All we know is the very surface level of she's leaving and it's quick and we really don't know anything else. And yet uh I have seen, well, clearly this is because of the OGL thing. I've seen, well, clearly this is because of this other thing. Clearly it's because all these things have been messed up and it's a secret firing. And I'm like, we don't know any of that. We don't know any of it, but we're just the internet will simply write the story that it wants to hear and tell it to itself. It is
Well,
both a void and a mirror at the same time.
it is, and I mean, absolutely. This is a segue to. I mean, now we're talking about a little bit about my work. You're reminding me quickly of Marco Escalini. He's a very famous, theorist who, well, he's the one who said, we have to stop thinking sometimes about games as being narrative making mechanisms. That if I throw a ball at you, you don't write a story about the ball, you just catch it, which I've always disagreed with because and we've had this conversation before. But if folks haven't heard this one, the reason I'm bringing it up is because people always talk about D&D as a story crafting mechanism that actually drives me crazy because literally everything is a story crafting mechanism. The thing that the absolute one of the most intrinsic traits of humanity is that we cannot have any experience and not create a narrative around it. And it's the same thing with the Cynthia Williams is you could take two experiences, you could take one, you could take before anything has happened, and you have to create meaning with it. It is a drive that is so unbelievably innate to the kind of fear that our lives and the chaos around us doesn't have any meaning, that we've got to constantly make narratives even when we don't have anything to make narratives about. And certainly businesses have figured that out rather quickly, which is why they do have large PR departments, because they want to make sure that the narratives that are going to be created out of whatever's happening in their company helps them make more money in the future. So you're right, and I don't want to there is I don't think there's much of a narrative to be told, or it's certainly going to go in very, very different directions as soon as we know who the next CEO is. At the same time, just like in Dungeons and Dragons, we're going to create a story about the experiences that the game elicits in us, because that is what we cannot help ourselves but to do.
I lived abroad for 4 years and I lived in Japan. When I was living in Japan, a friend came to visit and she brought a friend of a friend with her. And the friend of a friend was a constant font of questions. Why do the Japanese do this? Why do the Japanese do that? Why do the Japanese play pachinko? Why do the Japanese take their shoes off when they go into buildings? And on and on and on and on and on. Why do the Japanese bow when they're talking to people on the phone, even though people on the phone can't see them bowing?
Right.
And sometimes I had answers, sometimes I didn't. The bowing on the phone thing, I'm like, it's almost like a reflex in Japan. You're just constantly bowing at the waist. Uh, Pachinko, though, which if you don't know pachinko, it's kind of like vertical pinball with gambling mixed together. And there's huge pachinko parlors in Japan. And we would see them all over the place. And she would say, what do the Japanese see in pachinko? Why do they like it? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just a game. They just like it. And every time we saw a pachinko parlor, she would ask that question again. Why do they like pachinko so much? I don't know. And it, she asked the question with no self-consciousness at all that she was incessantly repeating the question. But she incessantly repeated the question because she abhorred the void of knowing. Not knowing why the Japanese like pachinko was such an affront to her internal sensibilities that she just kept repeating it again and again and again and again and again. Uh, and I see a lot of that instinct in the internet on stories like this, where it's about something we care
Right.
about a
Yeah.
lot. It's very dear to us, uh, but we don't have a good answer yet. So,
But that's why PR departments abhor a vacuum, right? Because if the internet sets the narrative before the company can, then you've got, I mean, think about we can move on, but I mean, the OGL fiasco, again, we have a narrative now. The narrative that got built is that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro don't understand anything about tabletop role-playing game. They don't know what's going on in the market. They're just a bunch of folks that absolutely want to, monetize and have no interest in what the game means. And that narrative, it probably has elements of truth in it, but there's probably complications. I'm sure that there's this concept that there's some kind of like Sauron-esque overlord that was running this company is absolutely not true, right? There's moments of folks just not understanding the community. The thing is that narratives have a way of, and that's, again, you're a historian, Ben. My mom's a historian. That's what historians is to try to is to try to build narratives that are the closest. That it's the same way that scientists build a theory to fit the facts of the way the physics work, right? You're trying to take all of the actual moments that seem, and even facts to me are elusive, but this concept of taking the things that you actually know and building something, as you mentioned, your friend trying to explain these things, it makes people feel extremely uncomfortable to live in moments of, I mean, I think about this all the time because to me it's an extremely chaotic world that games like Dungeons and Dragons try to make some meaning, try to make some narratives out of, to build experience. And I'm in the middle of Dr. Laycock's book, which Dr. Joseph Laycock's book about the about the satanic panic, exactly the same thing that he talks about in that book, and I can't wait to have a conversation with him. This concept that everyone's kind of base thoughts or feelings or beliefs about the world is trying to make some kind of meaning out of it. But I'm getting a little bit far afield. But we are narrative machines, and I'm hoping that the narrative is going to take a good turn for both Wizards of the Coast shortly.
so I did want to say I found the one thing I wanted to say yet, which was I think a victory for D&D players. And again, the problem is D&D players are not foremost in the mind of Chris Cox at Hasbro when he's going to make this choice about who's going to run Wizards of the Coast. The thing that I would want to see is Hasbro choosing someone to run Wizards who actually understands the D&D community.
Yeah.
I think that the way forward for D&D is building the community of players and uh, increasing the practice of play, which
Yep.
will then lead to an increase in sales of the product. And that Wizards, and again, TSR did this too. It's hard not to be like, we're a company, we make stuff, we're going to make a product, we're going to sell the product, and we'll make money by selling the product. But this is such a weird product that the most effective way to sell that product is, in fact, to build a community first and view that is when the sales will come. Because that is what happened over the last 10 years is you had the confluence of a good version of D&D plus Stranger Things plus Critical Role. And again, there's way more in there, right? I would also add the OGL into that mix, but
And we can't. I mean, the pandemic had a
oh, the pandemic, yeah.
had a huge influence on the popular Dungeons and Dragons. We can't overlook that, right?
Yeah.
And I think in some way, one of you talk about narratives. One of the things I think that companies have to be careful about is thinking that if your sales are going down in the tabletop role playing game field this year, and moving forward, it may be less as to anything that you're doing, and the fact that suddenly people can go outside again. Right.
Yeah.
That's just going to be an impact on the pandemic, kind of going in at least our experiential rearview mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Go
I
ahead.
do want to say one last thing, which is I think the solution is sitting in front of Hasbro. And I think, Ben, it's to hire us as the new CEOs
I'm not
of
gonna lie, I thought about sending in an application.
I
um
think we should. But I think this episode should clearly demonstrate our bona fides for operating Dungeons and Dragons. We understand the field, we understand making narratives, and I probably shouldn't have led with my lack of business expertise, but you'll take care of that part of it, Ben.
yeah, I mean, I'm a historian, not a business person. Again, if I were telling them who to hire, I would say they should go hire Ryan Dancy. That is
Oh,
who I would tell them to hire.
man.
Um, he again, one of the uh, one of the joys of writing about third edition and early Wizards of the Coast history is I'm writing about huge geeks with business degrees, and those skill sets are so interesting. Now, Chris Cox, who runs Hasbro now, says he's a big geek. I don't know that he is. I know that he for a while played D&D weekly, but and maybe that should be enough. But man, if you're playing D&D every week and your company tried to revoke the OGL, I don't know, man. Maybe you're playing D&D every week to get to know your product, or I don't know. I don't know. That
Yeah,
just
it's
seems so. How could anyone who plays D&D once a week be like, let's get rid of the OGL? That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. When TSR was started, Gary Gygax's concept was that this company will never be run or have anybody at a managerial position that wasn't a gamer, so to speak. And I'm again, this is coming from John Peterson's Excellent Game Wizards, and I'm trying to remember exactly who it was the first non-gamer. I want to say it was one of the Bloom brothers.
Yeah,
Um, was the first non-gamer, and it's like
Kevin.
how was it Kevin was the non-game? Yeah,
Brian Bloom was the gamer. Kevin Bloom
yeah.
was the non-gamer.
Thank you very much. And it's so funny, like how long did that edict even last? Like especially when if you've read that book, like how quickly there were many people that had nothing to do with games that were just often what's the word here? Family had was some ways related to Gygax or Bloom quickly had that company. It's interesting. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. I just think it's interesting to think around this concept of like how important is it to have a gaming background. I think it's absolute. I think you cannot hire the next person who doesn't who that would not. You cannot hire a person who doesn't understand why the OGL fiasco blew up in their face. I think you have to, even if you aren't playing a game every single week, I think you do have to understand what it is about the community and somewhat around the narrative that has already been established about the community. What we've gone through from 1970 1980s to when the OGL was created in 1990s to where Dungeons and Dragons is, what the Dungeons and Dragons movie means to folks, what the original Dungeons and Dragons film means to folks. I mean, all of those things are really embedded in the contemporary psyche of probably your most committed D&D players and how I think you're going to grow the brand moving forward. I think somebody has to understand that even if they don't necessarily have a weekly game. I was just going to say hasn't, and I don't know how much money they make. Again, business not my jam, but to me, isn't Paizo created the mold for how you keep embedded with your community and how you demonstrate that you share the same ethos, that you are among them rather than trying to dictate to what they should do. I mean, that's how the OGL fiasco came up. Like, well, from now on, you creators, you're going to have to pay us. That felt like Sauron rather than necessarily somebody within the fellowship. Thank you, metaphor. It hasn't Paizo made the mold of how you and what's the other I feel like there's another company that I'm not thinking around to who like every time they throw a Kickstarter, they get $1 million, even if people aren't even going to use the product. Um,
I will certainly say that Wizards is exceptionally bad,
oh,
and
Goodman Games.
Goodman Games, yeah,
I'm
and
so sorry, so
that's
sorry.
okay. Paizo is exceptionally good. I would say for every other gaming company, understanding the community is the lifeblood. Uh,
Right. Well,
Again, like
yeah.
I'm a passionate fan of Pelgrane Press and their gumshoe system. Uh, pretty much. Pretty much everything they publish for that, I just pick up. Like maybe I read it, maybe I don't, but I buy it. Uh, and they're having a Kickstarter relatively soon for Trail of Cthulhu Second Edition, which is their Cthulhu investigation role playing game. And one of them pops on Reddit and is like, "Hey, what would you like to see in a Trail of Cthulhu Second Edition Kickstarter? Like, what would you want to see in that?" And there's a long discussion, very frank, very honest. The person from Pelgrane who asked the question is involved in the thread, and you just see nothing like that from Wizards of the Coast. Partially, I know because the community can be pretty toxic. Partially, I know because Wizards didn't want people talking. They wanted to control what came out of the company, but that means, for years you just get these little dribs and little drabs coming out. And there was the period where they weren't even going to conventions, and you couldn't ever talk to a Wizards of the Coast designer. I met Chris Perkins very briefly at GaryCon, but GaryCon was one of the first times in a long time that I'd really seen a Wizards of the Coast presence. I know they were at Gen Con this year, and that is a step in the right direction. Paizo does a lot of good things. Wizards would need to do more though, because they have more resources, and Hasbro certainly wants more from D&D.
Mhm.
And D again, they keep coming back to D&D should be $1 billion brand, and I'm like, D&D could be $1 billion brand, but you need to build that community. You need to make you need to think of D&D as football, and you're the NFL though. You need to stop thinking in terms of what product will we make that we can sell that will make us $1 billion. You need to switch to community management, I believe, based on the fact that the only two times in the history of Dungeons and Dragons where sales increased instead of decreasing over time were 1974 to 82, I think. Again, I need to check my chart again. 74 to 82, and then 2014 to last year, maybe. Again, yeah, last year sales were down. So the second golden age of D&D should officially be from 2014 to 2022, 2023, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
two things that were characteristic of those eras were the player base actually went up. All right.
I
That was,
want
go
to
ahead.
I want to ask a question that has been on my mind now for like a long time, and I never asked this question because I feel like it's a dumb question. Because this is going to show my business ignoramusosity, also not a word. But this is the thing that I never understand when people talk. And I'm asking this question in the hopes that there are other people like me out there that don't understand business at all, that have had the same question, have never had the nerve to ask. When we talk around, like we're talking about durable goods, or we're talking around this concept that, D&D has always been under monetized. People are always trying to find more. The fact that, you have a new edition, it goes up, it comes down. How come it isn't enough to to me, if you think about, speaking of Hasbro, so think of it like a game like, well, actually, I don't even know. Does Hasbro make Monopoly, or I know
Yeah,
it
they do.
has, oh, they do. Okay, perfect. A game like Monopoly doesn't, I mean, maybe this is a terrible example because there's like 375 million different editions of Monopoly. I think I have the Christmas Story edition downstairs, probably the Star Wars one. There's probably a Dungeons and Dragons edition of Monopoly. Man, that would be really weird. But anyway, my point is this. How come a good like Dungeons and Dragons can't stay afloat from just new people coming into the game? In other words, like some people are obviously gonna that it can't have like a plateau that makes enough money for the company. Like you can still should be able to sell the books to people that have just gotten old enough to be new consumers of the thing. But that has seemed to never be enough, that you've got to get money from the old consumers. Does that make sense? Like, I mean, if it is a durable good, cars and bricks are still sold. Nobody's really complaining that they can't find a new way to, again, maybe somebody in the manufacturer business could say that I'm wrong, but how come it's not enough money to just sell it to people that are coming into the hobby just from getting older?
So
And
first of all, I want
does
to
that
point
make
out,
sense?
yes, it does.
Okay.
You're asking how come a natural flow of new players is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, your analogy of Monopoly is incredibly appropriate. Back in the Lorraine Williams at TSR days, Monopoly was a kind of paragon product that TSR would point to. People would tell me about executives coming to meetings and holding up Monopoly and being like, this is what D&D should be. D&D should be sold at Toys R Us. It should have rules simple enough to go on the back of a box, and 8-year-olds should be able to play it. And that is what we want D&D to be. Dragon Strike was actually an attempt to make a product like that. As for why you can't have D&D just running on the new people coming in, I would say is because new people have only really come in large numbers in two phases of the game's life. And again, it was that first golden age and that
Right.
second golden
Yeah.
age we just
Yeah.
talked about. And other than those two times, the game has had huge difficulty in even attracting uh the kind of natural flow of 12 to 14-year-olds that you would need. And as for why, I think A, part of it has been a social stigma that seems to have finally rubbed off. B, the difficulty of the game. The if you I don't think it's a coincidence that the times when D&D grew, there were simple versions of the game knocking around. You had like those beginner sets from the late 70s, early
Right.
80s
Yeah.
are one of the simplest versions of the game, and fifth edition is one of the simplest versions of the game. Getting someone into second edition, or getting someone into third edition, really, really hard. And again, I don't know fourth edition well enough to know, but I'm guessing it's not a step down in simplicity. But I'm not totally comfortable talking about fourth edition because it's the one I know the least. So I think the simplicity of the game is important. I think that you need an architecture for teaching the game. And in that first golden age, the game tore through college campuses. It
Right.
absolutely tore through college campuses. And interestingly, again, it's not so much going through high schools and grade schools. And again, you can get seventh and eighth graders playing D&D, but that was not where the growth seemed to be. It seemed to be in colleges because of, again, of the difficulty of the OD&D version of the game. Uh, I hope I'm answering your question, but
No, I think you are.
I think
Yeah.
stigma and the difficulty of the game are the reasons that uh also it's so new. If you say to someone, "Do you want to
Right.
play Dungeons and Dragons in 1995?" All they don't really know what you're asking probably. They've probably never seen a game of D&D. They
Yeah.
know it's this nerdy game with lots of rules that nerds play in 1995. Why do I want to play this game? And I remember the forever DM who was a GM at my high school, who's now a
Mhm.
writer for Forbes. His great big draw was Vampire the Masquerade. Like, let's go play Vampire the Masquerade. You get to be a vampire, and people are like, "Ooh, I get to be a vampire." Well, that sounds really sexy. I'm kind of interested in that as someone at a Catholic high school. Um, let's go do that. And off you go, and you play, and you go to a session, and you see, ooh, it's all these cool people pretending to be vampires. This seems very mysterious and awesome, and it's theatrical. And once you see it, then you're like, okay, I get it. I can do this. And again, 2014, the rise of actual plays, getting to see people playing D&D on the internet. Again, I thought the internet would kill D&D and it didn't. I think that solved a lot of problems. But again, Critical Role's numbers are down. Maybe it was a fad. I don't know. I don't know. Uh, but in answer to your question, despite all the sales of D&D intro attempted sales of D&D intro products in the 90s. None of them were huge successes. There was no third edition starter set, was there? I don't think there was. It
I
certainly
don't
wasn't.
remember one, but that doesn't, and that was when I was a bit, I kind of missed all of third edition. That was when I wasn't really playing.
Oh, and that was one of my peaks. That was my peak. Actually, third
Right.
edition was my D&D peak. I played more third edition probably than anything else. Um, I don't
Nothing
recall.
comes up. Yeah, I'm literally typing it into, and I typed in third edition starter set, and it went straight to eBay, which of course would be probably like the best place. And I'm
Yeah,
getting the third edition Warhammer 40,000 starter set. Let me see if what happens if I type D&D.
'cause, yeah, I don't recall one.
But
Fourth edition had a starter set. It was that kind of weird red box knockoff, with the iconic red box
yeah,
art on it,
Frank
which was very
Spencer.
cool. So, yeah,
Not Frank Spencer, but I meant to say Larry
Larry
Elmore's
Elmore, yeah,
Envy. Yeah,
and
that was me literally doing the dragon. I forget that we're actually on YouTube. I thought that nobody would catch me doing that, but I just literally did the dragon, um,
and
leering at
like
you.
sales of Dragon Strike were good, uh, but the product was actually a huge uh, loser of money for TSR for reasons I won't get into right now because we're running out of time. And if you've read my book, you know it. And if you haven't read my book, go read my book and you'll hear about how Dragon Strike lost money for TSR. And, I also really don't know if Dragon Strike hit the market that TSR wanted it to hit. Was it really new people going and buying Dragon Strike, or was it like, already D&D gamers being like, "Oh, this is kind of cool. You get some minis, there's a board, there's a videotape. It's only $30. Oh, let's give it a shot." Okay. Um, and man, they kept flinging beginner products out the door in the 90s and they just didn't stick. It was like every year they were trying some sort of new Dragon Quest, Dragon Strike, intro to the AD&D game. There were ones with CDs, one with VHS tapes, and
Yeah,
on we
but what?
go.
But and maybe you did answer this, and I'm slow on the uptick. But why? But maybe that's not the model. Why not make the player's handbook? And it's funny because we're talking about there's no third edition D&D, and I guess that was the concept. Is like why not make the player's handbook, D&D's Guides, Monster Manual indispensable? Of course, only the DM needs the DM guide and the Monster Manual, which is kind of strange. And of course, that's only 1/5 in your player base. And the Paizo, of course, tried the concept of like let's put them all in the core rule books. Everybody has to buy all the rules, and yet that they've left that model as well. And I mean, it's I don't know. Why not make the I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do. But we have to say we don't know what to do because since this we're considering this our application to run D&D, we have to come up with some solutions, Ben.
Oh, well, I
Uh,
would tell you, first of all, um, have a marketing budget. I will tell you that Liz Shu, who was head of marketing for I forget how long, but a long time, and I interviewed her. Her marketing budget was so small that she could not market products. She
hmm,
could only market the brand. And she felt like she was good at marketing the brand, but you want it to be a $1 billion brand, but you don't really give it a marketing budget. And again, Sarah Babe of Plot Points, she was on Encounter Party, which was essentially a Wizards of the Coast answer to Critical Role, and it wasn't advertised. Like
yeah,
they
yeah.
flew her out to Hollywood, put her up in a hotel, went to a studio, recorded a season of actual play, and then didn't advertise it. So that would be one of my first, like, okay, let's spend some actual money on marketing. That would be a number one thing that I would do. If you want this to be a $1 billion brand, you cannot have your marketing people saying we have no budget. Like,
Yeah,
how
well,
do
it's yeah. I mean, Wizards of the Coast wouldn't be Wizards of the Coast Hasbro wouldn't be the first company that kind of latches on anything that seems to kind of work and without finding any kind of long-term strategy for some of these things. And we've mentioned before the narrative that's slowly being creative is that the day of the Let's Plays is somewhat and I don't think they're going to go away. Certainly not Critical Role. I mean, I think that's a beast that's just gotten too many fans and too many folks that are really invested. But that the plethora of I always think about Roll20, which is, where I've been running my long-term campaign on. I would say like 3 years ago, almost every marketing email I got from Roll20 was always about the newest Let's Play that they were doing. I don't think they're doing any Let's Plays at all anymore. I feel like it's not as big as it once was, right? And I'm wondering if maybe that has to do with because and as a matter of fact, again, I feel like my email, as far as marketing emails I get from different companies, were almost always full of Let's Plays, and they don't seem to be taking off as much as they were. I wonder if they may be a bit pandemic related as well. And
well,
again,
my second suggestion would be, okay,
mhm,
um, now you're gonna do an actual play. And it's gonna be of A-list Hollywood stars. Like I love Deborah Ann Woll and Joe Manganiello and all that. I love our D&D celebrities, but you're gonna go get A-list stars like Ryan Gosling, you know, who was the woman in the Barbie movie whose name is escaping me.
Margot Robbie.
Yeah, Margot Robbie. You're gonna get Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie and two other huge A-list celebrities, and you are gonna do a movie length actual play with them, and you are gonna release it for free on the internet, and you are gonna have, along with that release, a product that goes with it. You are going to have some sort of adventure or some product that ties into it. And you are also going to do that with, again, years ago I would have said Jojo Siwa is the person. Like you're gonna find a celebrity that 12 to 14-year-olds would be excited to watch do something for an hour or two, and you're gonna do a game with them. And you will also have an associated tie-in product to go with it. And you'll have the best
Yeah.
how to play D&D videos on the Wizards of the Coast YouTube channel, run by you're gonna have Matt Colville do it because he's
Yeah.
already good at it already. Even though he's blocked me on Twitter, I will keep pushing that he is one of the best D&D evangelists of all time, and I will keep complaining about him blocking me on Twitter because, yeah, that one stings.
I find the way to not be blocked on Twitter is to not join Twitter. It's interesting to me. I don't know if I because I wonder if this concept of the Let's Play is still that old kind of concept of a, how do I say, a one-way media environment, right? Like if you see celebrities, because I don't know. I mean, to me, I think of there have been a lot of celebrities playing Dungeons and Dragons recently. If you pick up like the Legends and Lore book, there's lots of pictures in that book. The John Peterson, Kyle Newman, Sam, and Michael Whitwer book, which is excellent. It's a bit of a kind of a triptych of the art around fifth edition and all that they've done. It's like you see pictures of Jack Black, you see pictures of obviously the Matthew Lillards, Joe Manganiellos, Tom Morello's, the world. Um, to be still, Tom Morello is still my favorite celebrity that plays D&D. Where was I going with that? Does it necessarily capture imagination? I'm thinking specifically of, and again, just like you, I love that these folks are playing. It's really interesting to think of the wave, the reach that it. First of all, a lot of the celebrities are kind of a lot of them are coming back to Dungeons and Dragons, which I kind of find interesting. They're not necessarily emblematic. I'm symbolic of folks kind of coming into it for the first time. The But the thing is, it's still a broadcast style of system. It's like, let's watch these folks play. I think it would be interesting if there was some way that you could have an interactive environment where folks could actually play with, and I don't use the term this, and who are the celebrities in D&D, the people that really have the most ethos? Like, because Matt Colville and Joe Manganiello are two very different people as far as how we think about those things, right? Like, the original point I just wanted to make is I do think if you wanted to get people into the hobby by teaching them it, I don't necessarily know that this is a great question for the Discord community. Is watching it really a way to pick up Dungeons and Dragons? Because you can ask questions. You're not necessarily playing it. You're not saying, what are the decisions that I can make? You're watching other people who usually already know how to play, playing it. If you could create some type of environment that was a bit interactive where a person could watch, and maybe they could watch with a celebrity DM or other celebrity players, but could actually ask questions or could be playing along, that I think might be more effective. How you do that, I don't necessarily know. I'll have to
I
actually
would I
get
would
my
brief
first paycheck to
I would
tell
briefly
you.
throw out that you need to want to play before you learn to play. Because if the learning comes before the wanting, no one's ever going to do it. For a long time, that was the problem, was
Right.
why would I even want to do this?
Hmm.
And that's why you need something. And again, Critical Role did this, Stranger Things did this. They made people want to play. In,
Yes.
in in
Yes.
Buddhism, there's this idea of bodhicitta. It's generating desire for enlightenment. And you must generate, like the Buddhists generate their bodhicitta, the D&D community must generate the desire to play D&D. And again, you generate that because D&D is incredibly fun. It's a radical new medium. It's one of the best things to do with a human brain is play a role-playing game. It is delightfully difficult. And it's yeah, like I'm running my One Ring campaign has reached Moria. Tomorrow we're going into Moria. It's gonna be amazing. And I will confess, I'm a little like, oh, this is like session 16 or 17. I've been running it for like 6 months. I'm getting, even though like Moria is the thing that I wanted to do, I'm a little like, I gotta figure out this Moria thing, gotta read the Moria book. But if I just stopped playing in like 6 weeks, I would be like, "Hey guys, want to play Stars Without Number? Like, hey guys, want to play something else? Like, hey, I got this map making TTRPG called The Quiet Year. You want to play that?" Uh, and the desire. And when I was abroad and I couldn't play because it was really hard to play role-playing games abroad when I was abroad, uh, I would just dream about playing role-playing games. Like it was a constant thing I would think about.
I think it's interesting. I'm going back to your comment about your One Ring campaign. If there's one universal truth of dungeon mastering, but there's the old phrase is like, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And this metaphor, of course, the plan is your preparation for the game, and the enemy are the players. Not that I'm saying the players are the enemy; they totally are. Um, is that I think it's interesting what you said is like you're always kind of looking for more. But then whenever I run a game, what I think is going to be the most fun and the most interesting, what I think is going to be really interesting to see how they play, never actually is when you play. Like it's always interesting in the same way that the folks have said that they love the digressions on this channel. In today's episode, I suppose is one giant digression. We never did get to illusionist acquisition spells. It's always the digressions. It's often always the side characters. There's the old joke. There's the old meme where folks are like this cleverly crafted hook that the DM has, and then there's another like character that meant nothing the DM threw just to literally move the plot along that the DMs completely fall in love with, right? And yet, even as the DM, well, because I think probably the best mark of the DM is if what the players are enjoying, you're having the same enjoyment for that. Like whatever they love the best, you love the best. I think that's probably a mark of one of the best games. But isn't it always interesting that the things that are often most enjoyable for the game are never what we think is going to happen in prep? I think that's a universal preparation rule, is that what we think is going to be fantastic in the actual sense of the game, when you put it on the battlefield, so to speak, it goes in different directions. And that's often the most fun and the most completely rewarding thing about any type of tabletop role-playing game campaign.
Yeah, I would agree. It's the not knowing what is going to happen that is really, really exciting and interesting.
The radical contingency of every game.
Yeah. Like briefly, I love Legend of the Five Rings. It's a samurai role-playing game. And for a long time, like I'm going to say I had 2 or 3 months of the characters were the kind of assistants to the boy emperor and helping him through like, oh, he's judging life and death sentences and he's 12 and they need to help him through this, but they can't tell the emperor what to do. And oh, the emperor wants us to go and get him some special tea from a place. Okay, emperor, we'll go do that. And it was delightful and it was fun. And then one day, an hour before game, I decided assassins would kill him. And I'm like, okay, assassins are going to kill him. I don't know what's going to happen after that. The players don't know what's going to happen after that. We are entering a new phase of this campaign. But it was, I think, one of the most exciting sessions, both for the players and for me, because of that. I agree that if there are people for whom these are like semi-participatory novels, and I don't think that's the most exciting way to play. I think the most exciting way to play
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
We're flying by the seat of our pants here and nobody knows what's going to happen. We're just going to figure it out at the table. And obviously you can't do that all the time. You need toys and tools to help you at the table. What a great sentence. What a lot of alliteration. Toys and tools to help you at the table. All right, we got to wrap this up.
No.
Let me briefly say I will be at the Rivers and Ridges Book Festival next week, Saturday at 1 p.m. That is Saturday the 27th in Viroqua, Wisconsin. At 1 p.m. I will be talking about how to get into D&D, which this has been a really useful discussion to help me focus my thoughts. If you haven't bought my book, Slaying the Dragon, A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons, please do so. If you heard me screaming about how it was $3 on Kindle and then went to see if it was $3 on Kindle and discovered it wasn't, my publisher lowered the price and then raised it. And when I complained, they said, well, we can't do anything about it, kid. And I'm like, okay, publisher. So I apologize to you if you were caught in that unfortunate loop. Scott, anything from you?
A couple of quick things. First of all, I mean, geez, the book Slaying the Dragon is invaluable. That's $12. It's a steal. So I think everybody probably listened to our podcast has read your book a couple times. It's fantastic. I posted my dissertation up earlier today on Patreon because a couple people were hounding me. So, excuse me, on the Discord channel that you have access to through Patreon, and I cannot say enough around how much the way that we are able to do this podcast is from the loyal subscribers who give us a $3 $3 contribution on Patreon. So please, obviously it'll be in the show notes. Please consider supporting. It does give us access to the Discord from time to time. You can ask us to, again, post dissertations, talk about, ask us questions. We are always available to ask questions. If you want to ask me any questions about quantum realities, I'm happy to do so. I will be running Advanced Dungeons and Dragons all day at Gamehole. So that's the next thing that I will be doing. And and we'll talk more about what's together thing we might be doing at Gamehole as well.
Yeah.
But as always, I'm so happy to engage with folks that are listening to this channel, and I can't wait to do. This was just such a fantastic conversation, Ben. I just want to say how much I enjoyed thinking about both the importance and learning a little bit about the business side, which is something that I'm not sure of. So look forward to talking to everybody on Discord.
All right. Bye, Scott. You have a good Sunday.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.